"You can't sit here, ma'am." The young woman said it from the doorway of the Alderton Academy staff room, holding a clipboard and wearing the specific expression of someone who had been given a new policy to enforce and intended to enforce it fully. She was 26 years old, recently appointed as the school's administrative coordinator, and she had a lanyard around her neck with her name printed on it in the school's official font, Jessica. She was looking at the woman sitting at the corner table by the window with a cup of tea and a small notebook open in front of her. The woman at the corner table was 64 years old, dark brown skin, close-cropped silver-white hair, wearing the plain gray uniform of the Alderton Academy cleaning staff. The uniform that had been changed twice in 8 years, but always the same gray, always the same small embroidered crest on the left breast pocket. Her hands were around the cup of tea. Her eyes, when she looked up, were the eyes of someone who had been in this room many times and in many different capacities and found it mildly interesting to be told she could not be in it. Her name was Dorothy Hayes. "I beg your pardon?" she said. "The staff room," Jessica said, glancing at the clipboard, "has been redesignated as a space for teaching and administrative staff only. Maintenance and cleaning personnel have a new break room in the East Annex." She said it the way new policies were delivered, briskly, with the implicit suggestion that this was simply how things were now and resistance was beside the point. "Mr. Whitfield announced it last week. I'm sorry if you weren't informed." Dorothy looked at the young woman. She looked at the clipboard. She looked at the cup of tea in her hands, the cup she had used in this room for 8 years, at this table, by this window, which looked out over the courtyard that she had personally specified in the original design drawings because she had wanted the students to have a place where the light came in from the east in the mornings. She looked at the courtyard for a moment. "All right," she said. She finished her tea. She closed her notebook. She stood up, took the cup to the small kitchen area, washed it, placed it on the drying rack, and left the staff room. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Not yet. Dorothy Hayes had built Alderton Academy. Not in the way people said they had built things when they meant they had funded them from a comfortable distance and attended a ceremony and had their name put on a plaque. She had built it in the specific, literal, engineering sense of the word. She had drawn the plans. She had overseen the construction. She had stood on the site every day for 14 months in 1984 and 1985, while the building went up from the foundation she had specified on the ground she had purchased and prepared. She had done this through the Hayes Educational Foundation, which she and her husband Robert had established in 1980, with the proceeds from Hayes and Sons Construction, the firm Robert's father had started in 1952, and which Dorothy had joined at 22 as its first female engineer, and which she had eventually run as its chief operating officer for 11 years, before Robert's death in 1988 changed everything. The foundation had been their idea together, Robert's vision and Dorothy's execution, as most of their shared projects had been. Robert Hayes had been a man who spoke slowly and thought quickly, who had the particular quality of stillness that made people in rooms want to know what he was thinking. He had grown up on the east side of this city, the son of the man who had started Hayes and Sons, with 2 employees and a truck that broke down twice in its first month. He had gone to college on a scholarship that required him to maintain a grade point average that left very little room for anything else, and he had maintained it, and he had come back to the city with a degree in business and the intention of making something of what his father had started. He had met Dorothy at a community meeting about a proposed highway that would have cut through 3 of the city's historically black neighborhoods. Dorothy had been there because she was an engineer and had something specific to say about the structural and environmental arguments being made. Robert had been there because those neighborhoods included the one he had grown up in. They had both spoken at the meeting. Afterward, Robert had introduced himself. He had proposed 18 months later. Together they had built Hayes and Sons from a small regional contractor into one of the city's most respected construction firms. Dorothy had been the engineer, and Robert the businessman, and the combination had been, for 31 years, exactly right. The way certain combinations were right, not because they were balanced, but because each element made the other one possible. When Robert died in 1988, Dorothy had been 51 years old, and the head of a construction firm, and the director of a foundation, and the mother of a 15-year-old daughter, and a person whose entire life had been arranged around a partnership that was suddenly and permanently gone. She had done what she had always done. She had kept working. She had run Hayes and Sons for 7 more years and then sold it. She had run the foundation for another decade and then restructured it. She had done these things not because they were easy, but because they were what Robert had believed in, and she believed in them too. And the work did not stop because the person you had done it with was no longer there. Your mother never stopped, Patricia had told Dorothy once, in an airport, during one of the conversations that happened in airports when a flight was delayed and time became available for things usually avoided. Grandma Constance, she never stopped grieving your father, but she never stopped working either. Maybe that's where you got it. Maybe, Dorothy had said. She had thought about it. Or maybe it's just that the work is the point. If you stop doing the work, you've decided the work wasn't the point. And I don't believe that. Even when the work is mopping floors? Especially then, Dorothy had said. The floors need mopping. The children walk on them. Someone has to care about that. Someone has to show up every day and care about it even when no one is watching. Patricia had looked at her for a long moment. You're the most stubborn person I know, she had said. Your grandmother was worse, Dorothy had said. The foundation had been their idea together. Robert's vision and Dorothy's execution. Robert was the one who had said, early in their marriage, that they were going to build something for the children in the neighborhoods that had given them both everything they had. Dorothy was the one who had figured out how. She had spent 3 years researching school design, visiting facilities in 7 states, speaking with educators and parents and students before she put pen to paper on the first Alderton drawings. The school that resulted was not a monument. Dorothy had been very deliberate about that. It had no plaques with her name or Robert's. The foundation's name appeared nowhere on the building's exterior. The deed to the property was held by the Alderton Academy Educational Trust, a separate entity from the Hayes Foundation. And the trust documents were long and technical, and the name Hayes appeared in them only in the legal boilerplate of the founding agreement, which nobody read except lawyers. Dorothy's mother, Constance, had been alive when the school opened. She had stood in the courtyard on the October morning of the opening ceremony and looked at the building and said nothing for a long time. Then she had said, "You didn't put your name on it." "No," Dorothy had said. "Why not?" Dorothy had looked at the building, at the children already moving through it, already making it theirs, already doing exactly what she had built it for. "Because my name isn't the point," she had said. Her mother had looked at her for a long moment. "Remember that," Constance had said. "When it gets hard, and it will get hard, remember that you didn't do it for the name. You did it for the work. The work speaks. Let it speak." She had paused. "Don't let anyone make you forget that." Dorothy had carried that instruction for 40 years. She was carrying it now, walking through the east corridor toward the annex, her mop bucket ahead of her, the morning light coming in from the courtyard windows exactly as she had planned it to come in. She had come to work at Alderton Academy 8 years ago. It had not been a dramatic decision. After Robert died, she had run the foundation alone for several years, and then she had restructured it into a more autonomous form. A proper board, professional management, its funding secured in perpetuity through an endowment that Robert's life insurance and the sale of Hayes and Sons had made possible. The foundation did not need her the way it had needed her when it was young. The school did not need her oversight the way it had needed it when it was being built. She had found herself at 56 with a life that was full of purpose but short on dailiness. She had spoken to her daughter about it once, her daughter Patricia, who was a doctor in Atlanta, and who understood her mother in the specific way that daughters understood mothers, who were difficult to understand. "You miss making things?" Patricia had said. "You miss the actual work." "I miss being useful," Dorothy had said. "Then be useful," Patricia had said. "Do something with your hands." The cleaning position at Alderton had opened up the following spring. Dorothy had applied. The school's hiring office, which did not know who she was and had no reason to know who she was, had processed her application in the standard way and offered her the position at the standard rate. She had accepted. 8 years. She had cleaned every classroom and every corridor and every bathroom in the building she had designed. She had mopped the floors of the courtyard she had specified. She had polished the windows she had chosen for their light quality. She had learned in those 8 years things about the building that she had not known when she was designing it. The way the east corridor held warmth, longer than the calculations had predicted. The way the main hall acoustics created a particular echo that the students had turned into a game involving dropping books from the second floor railing. The way the staff room window seat caught the afternoon light in October in a way she had not entirely intended, but that was one of the most beautiful things in the building. She had been content. She had been useful. She had been, until 8 months ago, entirely invisible in the way she had chosen to be invisible. 8 months ago, a new principal had arrived. His name was Martin Whitfield. He was 47 years old, recently appointed from outside the district, with a background in corporate consulting that the board had found impressive and that several of the school's longest-serving teachers had found alarming. He had a particular vision for Alderton Academy, a vision that involved the words brand, excellence, and stakeholder engagement, in ratios that made Dorothy think of the corporate world she had left 30 years ago and had not missed. In his first month, he had commissioned a new logo. In his second month, he had redesigned the school's website with professional photography that made the building look like a lifestyle product. In his third month, he had introduced a tiered staff structure, a reorganization that was described in his announcement email as streamlining operations, and that resulted, in practice, in cleaning and maintenance staff being separated from teaching and administrative staff in the daily life of the building. Different break rooms, different entry protocols, different lanyards. Dorothy had read the announcement email carefully. She had noted the language. She had said nothing. In his fourth month, Whitfield had hosted a Heritage Gala, a fundraising dinner for prospective donors that featured a presentation about Alderton Academy's history. Dorothy had obtained a copy of the presentation afterward because one of the teachers who had been at the gala, a woman named Frances Okafor, who had taught English at Alderton for 19 years and who was the person at the school Dorothy felt most comfortable calling a friend, had described it to her, and Dorothy had asked to see it. The presentation said that Alderton Academy had been founded in 1985 by a community coalition with support from local philanthropists. It mentioned the Hayes Educational Foundation once, in a footnote, as one of several founding supporters. Dorothy read the footnote. She closed the presentation. She sat in the annex break room, the new break room, to which she had been relocated along with the other cleaning and maintenance staff, and she drank her tea. And she thought about what her mother had said, and she thought about what she had said in response, and she thought about whether those two things were still true. She decided they were. She did not say anything about the presentation. Not yet. The Tukezletme came in layers, the way these things always came. Not in a single act, but in an accumulation of small ones, each individually deniable and collectively unmistakable. The first layer was the staff room. Dorothy had been drinking her morning tea in the staff room for 8 years. Now she could not. The second layer arrived 3 weeks later. Whitfield announced that cleaning staff would begin their shifts 30 minutes later than previously, which meant the school's corridors would not be cleaned before the first students arrived. Dorothy and her colleagues had developed, over years, a system that ensured the building was clean and ready when the students came through the doors. The new schedule made this impossible. Dorothy raised the issue with the facilities manager, a quiet man named Harold, who had been at the school for 12 years and who looked at Dorothy with the expression of someone who agreed with her and was not going to say so. He told her the schedule had come from the principal's office and he did not have authority to adjust it. Dorothy adjusted her own arrival time by 30 minutes, unofficially, and did the work anyway. She did not ask to be paid for the extra time. The third layer came from Jessica and the clipboard, a new policy requiring cleaning staff to use the service entrance rather than the main entrance. The service entrance was on the north side of the building, which was the side that received no morning light and that Dorothy had specifically designed as a purely functional space. Delivery access, waste management, maintenance storage. She had never used that entrance in 8 years of working in the building. She began using it. She did not say anything about it. The fourth layer was the video. Whitfield had commissioned a video, a short promotional film for prospective parents and donors. Francis Okafor told Dorothy about it on a Wednesday afternoon in the corridor outside the science classrooms. The video included a retelling of the school's founding story. According to Francis, who had seen a preview, the video described Alderton Academy as having been established by Martin Whitfield's predecessor and built through a community partnership. The Hayes Educational Foundation was not mentioned. The name Hayes did not appear. "Did you watch the whole thing?" Dorothy said. "All 4 minutes," Francis said. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had been at this school for 19 years and was trying to decide how much to say. "Dorothy, I've been here a long time. I know who built this school." Dorothy looked at the corridor wall, the specific width she had specified, the specific height of the windows, the specific material of the floor that had held up better than the contractor had predicted. "Yes," she said, "you do." She walked to the next classroom and began cleaning it. The fifth layer arrived in the form of a letter from the school board. The letter informed the staff that Alderton Academy was under review for a strategic repositioning, a term that the letter did not define, but that Francis, who had heard whispers in the staff room from which Dorothy was now excluded, told her meant the board was considering a proposal from a development company to sell the site and relocate the school to a new facility in a different part of the district. "Relocate," Dorothy said. "Or close," Francis said more quietly. "The development company wants the land. The building would come down. Whitfield has been meeting with them since October." Dorothy was very still. "The land," she said. "The site," Francis said. "Prime location. The developer has been after it for years, apparently." She looked at Dorothy carefully. "Dorothy, is there something I should know?" Dorothy looked at the cleaning supply closet she was standing in front of. The closet she had specified at exactly this location in the building, because it was the optimal position for a cleaning station relative to the East Wing classrooms. She had thought about it for 2 days before finalizing the placement. "Not yet," she said, "but soon." She went home that evening and called her daughter. "Patricia," she said. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Yeah." "Nothing's wrong, but I need you to find the trust documents." She paused. "The Alderton Academy Educational Trust, the founding agreement." A pause on Patricia's end. "Mom, what's happening?" "Someone is trying to sell the school," Dorothy said. "The land the school is on." "Can they do that?" Dorothy thought about the founding agreement. She thought about the specific provisions she and Robert's lawyer had drafted in 1983, in the year before the construction began, when they had sat in a law office on a Tuesday afternoon and worked through every scenario they could imagine in which someone might try to do something with this school that they had not intended. They had imagined quite a few scenarios. They had written provisions for all of them. "No," Dorothy said. "They cannot." The lawyer's name was James Osei. He was 53 years old, a property and trust law specialist who had been Dorothy's attorney for 22 years, since the restructuring of the Hayes Foundation in 2002. He had a calm, deliberate manner and a very precise understanding of the documents he had spent decades maintaining. Dorothy called him on a Thursday morning. She called him from the service entrance of Alderton Academy, standing in the north side access corridor that smelled of cleaning supplies and received no morning light, because that was where she was when she had 30 minutes and needed to make a call. She told him what was happening. James listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The founding agreement," he said. "The deed restriction clause." "Yes. The property cannot be sold, transferred, or redeveloped without the written consent of the Hayes Educational Foundation or its designated successor in interest." He paused. "Which is—" "Me," Dorothy said. "The board restructured in 2019. I'm the sole trustee with signing authority for that specific provision." Another pause. "Dorothy, does the school's board know that?" "I think they may have forgotten," Dorothy said. "It's been 40 years. Does Whitfield know?" "I don't think Whitfield has ever read the founding agreement." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The development company. Do you know which one?" "Meridian Commercial Properties." "I know them. They're thorough. They would have done a title search." He paused. "Unless they found the restriction and decided to proceed anyway on the assumption that no one would enforce it. Or on the assumption that the person who could enforce it was mopping floors in a building they were planning to knock down and didn't know what they were sitting on," Dorothy said. A pause. "Dorothy, how long have you known about this?" "About the development proposal? 3 weeks. And before that, how long were you working there before this came up?" 8 years." James was quiet for a long time. Dorothy stood in the service corridor and let him be quiet. "All right," he said finally. "Here's what we do." James filed the notice on a Monday morning. It was a formal notice to Alderton Academy's Board of Trustees and to Meridian Commercial Properties, citing the deed restriction clause in the founding agreement of the Alderton Academy Educational Trust and formally invoking the Hayes Educational Foundation's right of consent over any proposed sale, transfer, or redevelopment of the property. The notice included a copy of the founding agreement. It included Dorothy's current status as sole trustee with signing authority. It included James's contact information and a request for all parties to cease any further proceedings relating to the proposed transaction pending resolution. It was 5 pages long and precisely worded, and it arrived, Dorothy was told afterward by Frances, like a stone dropped into the still water of a board meeting that had been discussing the Meridian proposal in terms that suggested the board considered the matter largely settled. The board chair called James within the hour. James called Dorothy. "They want a meeting," he said. "When?" "Tomorrow. They're suggesting the school, the boardroom." Dorothy thought about the boardroom. She had been in it twice in the past 8 years. Once to fix a ceiling tile that had come loose above the main table, and once to clean the windows after a particularly wet November. Both times she had been alone in the room. Both times she had looked at the table, the long mahogany table that had been a gift from a donor in 1987. And she had thought about the meeting at which that table had been accepted, and whether the donor had known whose foundation had built the room the table sat in. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow. The boardroom." She arrived the next morning through the main entrance. Not the service entrance, the main entrance, which faced east, and received the morning light exactly as she had specified it should receive it. Jessica was at the reception desk. She looked up when Dorothy came in. Her expression went through several things in the space of a second. Recognition, confusion, recalibration. Dorothy signed the visitor log and walked to the boardroom. There were 9 people in the room. The 5 members of Alderton Academy's Board of Trustees. Martin Whitfield, who was sitting at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who had been told something in the last 24 hours that had significantly altered his understanding of his own situation. a lawyer representing Meridian Commercial Properties, a woman in her 30s who had the specific controlled expression of someone who had read the founding agreement overnight and was now here to manage the consequences. James Osey, beside Dorothy, and Dorothy herself. The board chair was a man named Gerald Foster. He was 69 years old, a former banker, and he had been on the Alderton board for 11 years. He looked at Dorothy across the table with the expression of a man seeing something he'd been looking at for years without seeing it. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Mr. Foster," Dorothy said, "I want to say, on behalf of the board, that we were not aware—" "I know you weren't," Dorothy said. She was not unkind. She was simply clear. The Hayes Foundation's role in the school's founding has been significantly underrepresented in recent communications. I noticed. I chose not to raise it until it became necessary. She looked at the table. It's become necessary. The Meridian lawyer began to speak. James raised one hand, very slightly, the specific gesture of a lawyer, indicating that his client would speak for herself. The Meridian lawyer stopped. Dorothy looked at Gerald Foster. "Let me tell you what I'd like," she said. She did not ask for much. She asked for 3 things. The first, the development proposal would be withdrawn. The school would remain on this site, in this building, which had been designed for this site and for these students, and was 40 years into its intended life with many decades remaining. The second, the school's founding history would be accurately represented in all future communications, videos, presentations, and public materials. Not because Dorothy wanted recognition, she did not, but because the students and teachers and parents who were part of this school deserved to know the true story of what they were part of. A school built by a black woman engineer and her husband for the children of neighborhoods that needed it. That was the story. It should be told. The third, Martin Whitfield's restructuring of staff protocols, the tiered break rooms, the service entrance requirement, the schedule changes, would be reviewed by the board and returned to the standards that had governed the school before his arrival. Not because Dorothy's personal comfort was at stake, because the people who cleaned this building were part of this building in the same way the people who taught in it were part of it, and a school that treated them otherwise was not the school she had built. She said all 3 things calmly and in order. The room was very quiet when she finished. Gerald Foster looked at the founding agreement on the table in front of him. He looked at Dorothy. He looked at the room she had designed, the walls she had specified, the windows that let in the morning light at exactly the angles she had intended. "I have a question," he said. "Yes." "8 years," he said. "You've been here for 8 years, cleaning this building. Why?" Dorothy thought about her mother in the courtyard on opening day. She thought about what Constance had said, and what she had said in response, and whether it was still true. "Because the work needed doing," she said, "and I knew how to do it, and the building needed someone who loved it." She paused. "My mother told me not to do things for the name. She said the work speaks." She looked at the room. "The work has been speaking for 40 years. I didn't need to add my name to it." Gerald Foster looked at her for a long moment. "The board," he said, "accepts your terms." Martin Whitfield resigned 6 weeks later. The resignation was described in the board's announcement as mutual and amicable, which was the language used when a resignation was neither of those things, but everyone had agreed to pretend it was. He was replaced on an interim basis by Francis Okafor, who had been at the school for 19 years and who had, in the weeks following the boardroom meeting, told Dorothy that she had known something was wrong with this school the moment Whitfield had moved the cleaning staff to the annex. "Why didn't you say anything?" Dorothy had asked. Francis had looked at her. "Why didn't you?" Dorothy had thought about that. "I was waiting," she said. "For what?" "For the moment when saying it would matter." She paused. saying it before the moment doesn't change anything. It just uses up the energy you need for when the moment comes. Frances had looked at her with the expression of a woman filing something away. The Alderton Academy website was updated. The heritage presentation was rewritten. The founding story now read, Alderton Academy was built in 1985 by Dorothy and Robert Hayes through the Hayes Educational Foundation for the students of the communities that shaped them both. The school has been in continuous operation for 40 years, serving thousands of students on the site its founders chose and in the building they designed. Dorothy read it on the school's website on a Tuesday morning, sitting in the staff room at the corner table by the window with a cup of tea. Jessica passed through the room at 9:15. She stopped when she saw Dorothy. Dorothy looked at her. "Good morning, Jessica," she said. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," she said. She continued through the room. Dorothy returned to her tea. The courtyard outside the window was full of students at their morning break. The October light was doing what she had designed it to do. Coming in from the east, hitting the courtyard at the specific angle that made the space feel larger than it was, that made the students feel, without knowing why, that they were in a place that had been built for them. They were. She had built it for them, and she had stayed to make sure it stayed that way. On the first day of the new term, Frances Okafor, interim principal, possibly permanent, the board was discussing it, called an all-staff assembly. All staff, not just teaching and administrative, cleaning, maintenance, catering, grounds. Everyone who worked in the building. The assembly was held in the main hall, which had been designed with acoustics that Dorothy had spent 3 days calculating in 1984, because she had wanted every student and every teacher to be able to hear clearly from any point in the room. The acoustics worked exactly as she had calculated. Frances spoke for 10 minutes. She talked about what the school was and what it was for. She talked about the people who had built it and the people who maintained it and the students who filled it every day. She talked about the staff room and the service entrance and the tiered structure that had been introduced and was now gone. Then she said, "There is one person in this room without whom none of us would be standing in this room. She designed this building. She built it. She has spent the last 8 years cleaning it." She looked at Dorothy, who was standing against the far wall with the other cleaning staff, her gray uniform the same as it had always been. "Dorothy, would you like to say anything?" The room looked at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at the room, at the students in the front rows who were looking at the woman in the gray uniform with expressions of genuine confusion and the beginning of understanding. At the teachers who had known her for years as the quiet woman with the mop bucket. At the board members who had come to the assembly and were standing at the back. At Frances, who was looking at her with the expression of someone who had waited 19 years to see this and was glad it had come. Dorothy thought about her mother. She thought about what Constance had said. The work speaks. Let it speak. She thought. It has been speaking for 40 years. She thought, maybe it is time to say one thing myself. She straightened. "Build things that last," she said. Her voice carried clearly. The acoustics she had calculated worked exactly as they should. "And then take care of them. That's all." She looked at the students. "That's what I did," she said. "That's what you should do. Build something. Take care of it. Don't worry about your name on it." She paused. "The work knows who built it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a student in the third row, a girl, perhaps 15, dark brown skin, close-cropped hair, the kind of student who sat in the front because she was serious about being there, raised her hand. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "what did you build next? After the school?" Dorothy looked at her. She thought about the question. She thought about Hayes and Sons, which had built 43 structures in this city over 30 years. She thought about the foundation, which had funded 6 schools in 3 states. She thought about the hospital wing, and the community center, and the library branch, and the bridge repair project, and the dozen other things that carried no plaque with her name. "A few things," she said. The girl nodded, satisfied. Dorothy walked back to the wall where the cleaning staff were standing. Harold, who had been at the school for 12 years and had the expression of a man who had spent 12 years working in a building without knowing who built it and had found out 6 weeks ago, looked at her. "A few things," he said quietly. "A few things," Dorothy confirmed. She picked up the mop bucket. The school day had begun. On a Saturday in October, the 40th anniversary of Alderton Academy's opening, a small ceremony was held in the courtyard. Not a gala, not a heritage dinner. A morning gathering, students and staff and some parents and some members of the community, in the courtyard that received the east light the way Dorothy had designed it to receive it. Patricia flew in from Atlanta. She stood beside her mother in the courtyard and looked at the building her parents had made, and she said nothing for a long time, the same way her grandmother had said nothing in this same courtyard 40 years ago. Then she said, "Grandma Constance was right." "About what?" Dorothy said. "About the name." Patricia looked at her mother. "You didn't put your name on it, and now everyone knows whose it is." Dorothy looked at the courtyard, at the students moving through the morning light, at Francis, who was talking to a group of parents near the entrance, at the building that had stood for 40 years and would stand for 40 more and would still be doing what it had been built to do long after everyone in this courtyard was gone. "Your grandmother was usually right," Dorothy said. "You should tell her story," Patricia said. "What she said to you, the day it opened." "I just did," Dorothy said, "to 800 students." Patricia looked at her. Then she laughed. The specific laugh of a daughter who has been surprised by her mother after 64 years of being her daughter and is not expected to be. Dorothy almost smiled. "Come on," she said. "They're cutting the cake." They walked together across the courtyard in the October light, in the building that Dorothy Hayes had built with her hands 40 years ago and had been taking care of every day since. The work knew who built it. It always had.